Looking to you, you're just remaining stoic. You're not reacting at all. Let me pray. Father, thank you for all that we've sang, all that we've engaged in already this morning. What a treat it is to be part of the family of God. So often, God, I know I do, can so easily take it for granted. God, just freshly reminded of the gift of one another this morning as we get to worship together, we get to pray together. We get to be, God, just engaged and invested in one another's lives, God, and we love that and we thank you for that. And God, thank you for a Sunday. Thank you for a Sunday when we get to recenter. Through all of the week, God, thank you for a chance to recenter, and through it all, our eyes are on you. Today, we deliberately choose to set our attention and our affection once again on you. Thank you there's no other hoops we have to jump through, no other hurdles we have to climb. God, you're waiting, you're ready for us just to turn again, and we return to you with all of our hearts again this morning. Thank you for who you are, God, and I just ask again that the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts would be pleasing to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Romans 12, verse 14. If in some ways it feels like this is the peak, this is the pinnacle. Like in some ways it feels like Paul has been calling the church to deny themselves. He's called the church to don't be conformed anymore to the pattern of the world. Renew your minds. Use your gifts. Love one another well. Open up your hearts and your homes to those that are in the family. And all of that is costly. All of that requires something. This is not for the faint-hearted, the challenge that Paul is laying down for the church. But it feels like it doesn't get any more challenging than this. It feels like it doesn't get any more difficult than Romans 12, verse 14. Bless those who persecute you. Bless them and pray for them. Pray that God will bless them. It's really, really difficult. Last week we talked about hospitality and the challenges that there even is, that we don't just, as Lila shared with us, we seek actively ways to be hospitable, to pursue hospitality. We seek it not just when it's convenient. We seek to offer hospitality. I loved how Lila finished our time last week in how Jesus modelled hospitality. How in John 21 he has made breakfast for the disciples on the beach. Jesus offered hospitality. He modelled love through acts of service. And that's what he did through his whole life. And so if we were to again engage with what Jesus modelled for us when it comes to the challenge of verse 14 of Romans 12, there's many places we could turn to. But in his most famous sermon, Jesus in Luke 6, in the account that Luke offers to us, Luke 6 verse 27, but I tell you, love your enemies. It's almost verbatim what Paul has called the church to. He's heard Jesus and he's seen Jesus model it and live it out. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. And pray for those who ill treat you. Jesus had beautifully demonstrated how to model love through acts of service. He had modeled love to those who had persecuted and those who had mistreated him. We were, even in our prayer time this morning, we were drawn back to the man on the cross, to Jesus on the cross, and how he models blessing those who have harmed him, how he models loving those who have mistreated him, even from the cross, from those who have been so brutal with him. Jesus is able to say, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. perfect model of loving those who have persecuted, blessing those who have mistreated them. And Paul really had caught this, and we see it obviously in his life, but even in one of his last letters that we reckon in Second Timothy, in his closing remarks to Timothy, he's even reminding Timothy, if this is the life that you're going to pursue, if it's the godly life, if it's the life of modeling yourself after the ways and the words of Jesus, then you're going to be persecuted. He says it as plainly as that in 2 Timothy 3 verse 12. Anyone who wants to live a godly life will be persecuted. And Jesus tells us over and over again, he tells the disciples over and over again, like, in this world you're going to have troubles. You're going to face many trials. You're going to face many tricky situations. And our natural response, I'm assuming I can speak for most of us in the room, this is probably the most difficult type of message to hear, because it's going against everything that is instinctual. It's going against everything it goes against all reason. It goes against all instinct. It's a love that goes beyond common sense. And I think even as Lila's reminding us of the context of the day, of the culture that this letter is being written in, like what Paul is sharing to the church here is made possibly even more hard, or whenever you realize what the church is facing. They're being faced daily with the mistreatment of Roman oppression. Roman oppression, Roman mistreatment. Their lives are difficult. And what is Paul's advice? What is Paul's call to them in the midst of their being mistreated, in the midst of being persecuted? Paul's call to them is pray for them. His call is to speak well of them. It's to bless and not to curse. It goes beyond all instinct. It goes beyond all reason. It is a love that goes beyond common sense. And I couldn't help, and it feels like this morning, I just want to share a few stories, because it feels like that's all I could ground myself in over the last couple of days, to be inspired and encouraged that there is those even now are modeling this way of life, of blessing those that have cursed and blessing those that have persecuted. And some of you will be familiar with the story of Jim Elliot and Nate Saint. And it's awful that I don't remember the other names, but I suppose those two became the more well-known of the five men who in 1956, after months of engaging with the Guarani tribe, if there's any speakers of Spanish or whatever in the room, it's probably made a hash of that. But it's in the Amazon rainforest. It was the Amazon rainforest in Ecuador, the Guarani tribe. And for months, these five guys, wanting to engage, wanting to present the gospel to this tribe right in the heart of the Amazon in Ecuador, flew over and dropped gifts for months, and kept dropping gifts, and realized that they seemed to be well received. And so at the start of January 1956, they decided that they were going to land. And these five men, these five evangelists, desiring to bring the good news of Jesus to this Guarani tribe, landed and set up camp on the beach a few kilometers from the tribe, from the tribal settlement. And if you are familiar with the story, it is awful, so sad that these five men, whenever they went to engage, they lost their lives. They were attacked by the tribe. The tribe seen them as a threat, and they were attacked, and these five men were killed. You imagine the instinctual response to that. You imagine the reasonable response to someone taking the life, someone persecuting and taking the life of your family. It would be reasonable to expect that they would not bless, maybe think ill of. But 2 years later, Rachel Saint, Nate Saint's sister, and Elizabeth Elliot made their way to this tribe and they settled. They settled in this tribe who had taken the lives of their brother, Nate Saint, and Elizabeth Elliot's husband, Jim Elliot. And they moved into this community, and there's many books that you could read, and there's many documentaries, I think, and movies that you could watch, and I would encourage you to do so. But over a period of time, this community became radically transformed because of how these two ladies in particular radically loved them. How in spite of the mistreatment and the persecution, they blessed them and they prayed for them. And ultimately, the love of Jesus through this incredible couple made a marked difference. And Nate's son, Steve Saint, who was 5 at the time of his dad's death, from the age of 10, spent his summers with this tribe, the Wurmbrand tribe. Spent his summers from the age of 10 with the tribe that had taken the life of his father and his father's friends. It's remarkable to hear the testimony of this man. And the man, Minkai, who had taken the life of his dad, became his closest friend. And Minkai died in 2020, and I've asked Tamar just to play the video of the tribute that Steve Saint shared on the death of Minkai, the man who had taken the life of his dad decades previous.
Fun-loving man has just died deep in the Amazon jungles of Ecuador. His name, known to millions of people around the world, was simply Minkai. He was one of my dearest friends in the world. Minkai and a small group of Waurani from his violent tribe speared my father Nate to death when I was just 5. Only those who understand the transforming power of Christ's message could understand our friendship. We will miss you for a while, Grandfather Minkai, but we look forward to the reunion with you that we are promised.
There's so many videos I've watched over the years of Steve Saint and sharing the stage with Minkai. But there's just something about that video that I've watched it several times over the weekend. It just moves me every time how he speaks of this man, but how he also recognizes that it's only the transforming love of God, it's only the transforming power of God that can make any sense out of someone being able to bless those who have cursed them, that are able to pray for those who have mistreated them. It's the human nature versus the transformed nature, because it is impossible to respond like that in our human nature. And wherever you are finding areas of persecution, I imagine it's not going to be like this. It's maybe an extreme example. But wherever you're facing some level of mistreatment or some level of ill feeling being directed towards you, it is impossible to respond well in your human nature. Your human nature will always want to retaliate, will always want to instinctually react in a negative way, but in our transformed nature that Paul has called us to and has continued to invite us to throughout this chapter, there is a challenge and an opportunity for us to love the unlovable. It almost feels strange at times that when I wrote that down last night, it felt weird writing it an opportunity. It feels like that's what Paul's seen it as. It feels like that is the challenge that Jesus has given us, to love the unlovable and to speak the peace of Jesus over those who are neither reconciled to God, but also neither reconciled to others, and possibly even neither reconciled to themselves. And as we get to that place, as we pursue that place of being able to bless those that are speaking ill of us, or those that are doing things that are unfair in their mistreatment of us, as we bless them, we commend them to the loving care of God. When we have genuinely prayed for them, when we've genuinely prayed for their needs, we will more easily be able to bless them to their face. It's God's love in us. Paul's words, as I continue to remind us, are impossible for us, but for the love of God. It's only the transforming power of his love. Corrie ten Boom, her story in itself is one of being able to bless those who have mistreated, being able to offer forgiveness and mercy to those who had previously brutally mistreated her and her family. And her story is worth telling in itself, but I read a story that Corrie ten Boom told of a guy in the middle of Africa, a guy called Thomas. And Thomas was a man well known for his love for God and his love for people. And Thomas and his family lived in a straw hut in the middle of Africa. And his neighbor was almost the complete opposite of Thomas. Thomas loved God and loved people, but his neighbor hated God and hated Thomas, probably because of his love for God and for people. And so this neighbor of Thomas's began sneaking over in the middle of the night and setting fire to the straw that was on the roof of Thomas's hut with his wife and his family. And even the thought of him not reacting throughout the days is probably miraculous in itself. But after a couple of weeks, one night, this neighbor, once again, in his desire to persecute and his desire to hate, went out once again and lit the straw, set fire to Thomas's roof. And it just so happened that as the fire began to catch, a wind came and the sparks of the fire blew over to the neighbours and set the neighbour's roof on fire. And Thomas's response was to quickly put out the fire of his neighbours, or put the fire out in his own, and immediately rushed to help his neighbour put out his fire. He badly burnt his arms and his hands as he sought to help his neighbour put the fire out that he was the one who initiated. And I just love how Corrie ten Boom recounts this encounter that she had with Thomas. She was speaking in these meetings across the middle of Africa and meets Thomas a couple of days later and asks him about the burns on his arms and his hands. And he then goes on to tell the story about what happened. And Corrie ten Boom's response was, well, that's a relief that this guy is in prison. And he said yes, but then he began to say, but more than that, he began to weep as he talked about how this man had such gifts and he had such abilities. And he was at pains. As Corrie ten Boom relays the story, he was at pains at how this man's life had turned out and how he genuinely prayed for him. And as I was thinking about when you've genuinely prayed for someone, you're so much more able to bless them to their face. I just was drawn once again to this story of Thomas. I almost think it's something from a made-up story, but a few days later, Corrie ten Boom had the opportunity to go to the prison which had held this neighbour because the chief of the tribe heard all that had happened through the other neighbours and called the police, and the neighbour ended up in prison. And so a few days later, Corrie ten Boom is there sharing the story of Jesus' love and joy to the prisoners in this prison. And when she asks if anybody would want to respond to the news of Jesus, then this neighbour raises his hand. Obviously she didn't know at the time. But after the meeting was over, she began to speak to this man. And she soon realised that it was Thomas's neighbour. And she spoke of Thomas's burnt arms and his burnt hands being raised in prayer, crying out for his neighbour. And she was able to relay that story to the neighbour, and he wept as he encountered Jesus. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful story that Corrie ten Boom shared about this incredible guy, Thomas, as this man wept big tears when he was told how much that Thomas loved him and how much Thomas was praying for him. And so today, if you have time this afternoon, I just commend these stories to you. I commend the voice of the martyrs to you to maybe engage with today as you seek inspiration. And because it's one thing, I guess, for me to be able to stand up here and say, not to demean anything that you are going through, but in some ways it sometimes can be too easy just to say these things without actually living them out in the way some people have lived out for years and for decades. And so, as much as I want to share the Word of God, I just want to share my heart this morning. I think you'll be inspired, and you'll be challenged, and you'll be motivated as you engage with the stories of how God has used his body across the world to bless those who have persecuted. The stories of what happens when those who will genuinely pray for those who have mistreated them, and what God does in the middle of that is phenomenal. One last person I wanted to share about was Sabina Wurmbrand. Her husband is probably, if anybody knows of the Wurmbrands, maybe her husband is the more well-known. He came to faith later on in life. He wrote a book called Tortured for Christ. His wife has also wrote a couple of books. But Sabina Wurmbrand lost her parents and her brother and her 3 sisters in the war at the hands of the Nazis. But when the war ended and the Germans were retreating, there was many soldiers that were left afraid and frightened and starving. And again, you think about what your natural response would be to encountering someone to a people who have inflicted such pain and such loss and such horror. And Sabina Wurmbrand's response, even though it could have cost her life, her response to these frightened, starving soldiers was to open up her home, was to bless them and give them a place to stay. And her husband, consequently over the years, took several of those that had once opposed them, several Nazis, into their home. And over again, you'll discover in Sabina's life how she returned goodness and love for evil over and over again. In fact, I read one article that said it was the theme of Sabina's life, returning goodness and love for evil. And what we've come to know about the scriptures, if something is repeated more than once, it means it's worth paying attention to. It's worth giving our attention to. And I think Paul knew how difficult and challenging these words were going to be, that it almost takes up the rest of this chapter. Because not only does he instruct or guide or encourage us to bless those who persecute you, but he goes on in verse 17, don't repay anyone evil for evil. He goes on further, let God take revenge. Don't you get involved. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you'll heap burning coals on his head. He knew that we'd find it difficult, and he repeated it a few more times. It requires a deliberate spiritual decision. It can't be merely emotional, because we'll never respond that way in our own emotions, in our own human flesh. It can only be with the help of the Spirit in us and also the community around us. And it's important to say that, because as we've been at pains to say throughout this look through Romans, Paul is writing this to us as individuals, but equally, maybe I think even more so for us as a community, to us as churches. And it can only be with the help of the Spirit in us and the community around us that we can put into practice all of what we're talking about, all of what we're sharing throughout this series. But definitely when it comes to this. And so I can't help but go back to the start of Romans 12, that we don't copy the behavior of the world. We need the Spirit in us for that. We need the community around us for that. Because the challenge is that we cultivate a character that pushes back against the violence that increasingly is all around us and the divisiveness of our culture. And it's so easy at times with the way that we think and even the words that we use just to copy the behavior and the patterns of this world. But the call and the challenge to us, and I think especially throughout Romans 12, is that we cultivate a character that pushes back against that. And that is no more obvious that when it comes to being able to bless those who speak ill of you, who mistreat you, who persecute you, to be able to pray for them is a sign that you're certainly resisting the patterns of this world and pushing back against them. And so we're going to sing one last song together, hopefully land some of this just within your own heart. Maybe there's some stuff that you need to wrestle with. You're automatically recognizing those that maybe that you need to change your posture towards. Try your best to pray for them. Do it with the help of the Spirit. Do it with the help of those around you. I think as you begin to do that, you're going to inevitably be able to bless them to their face. So, Spirit, help us. Amen.